Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending this Lunch and Learn session organised in collaboration between the Knowledge and Library Services at NCIC and Boost, the North East and North Cumbria Learning and Improvement Community. So my name is Ashley Eaton and I am from Boost, and today we are joined by Paul and Heidi Williams from the OD and Improvement team at South Tees Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, and they're going to be talking to us about blame is the enemy of safety and responding to the South Tees way. And Paul, I don't know whether you can just share the slides for us just so I can go through the first couple in regards to just some of the protocols for the session. That would be much appreciated.
Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, if you can hit, thank you. So these Lunch and Learns are designed to be a relaxed and informal space for health and social care staff to come together, share experiences. Before we kick off, just some very quick protocols. So webcams off, please, during the session. If you can mute yourself when you're not speaking, post any questions in the chat, and we'll also have some time for questions at the end as well. Listen with respect and be present. Please pass on, share the learning, spread the word about these sessions, and please be aware that we are recording as well. We will post a link to be able to give feedback in the chat, so if you're able to complete that, that would be much appreciated. It's very short, just a very few questions. And now, without further ado, I will pass over to Paul and Heidi. Over to you guys.
Thank you.
Just as a starting point, since we were introduced as Paul and Heidi Williams, I should make clear that we are not related.
No.
But we do refer to ourselves often as the Williams sisters, so there we go. So blame is the enemy. We've got two strands to this, I suppose, today. One is about how we at South Tees have introduced a restorative justice and learning culture where we are trying to get away from a blame culture. But the other side of it is that in encouraging people to speak up, we ended up implementing our restorative program from the bottom up. And we'll tell you more about how that came about as we go along. So a bit of a timeline as to how we got where we are. So in 2002, this guy, Sidney Dekker, published a book on human error. Now, Sidney Dekker, born in Amsterdam, flying in Denmark, is now a professor of psychology at a university in Australia. What has he got to do with the NHS? Well, one of the books he published was about human factors within a healthcare setting. And so because of the work that he did looking into human error and human factors and other ergonomic factors, he's become, I suppose, recognized as one of the world's leading researchers in this field. Certainly not the only writer, but one who is internationally recognized. Sometime later, a mental health trust in the Northwest, Merseycare, were responding to a number of patient deaths that were ostensibly unconnected, but there were too many of them happening for them to see that there was no connection. So they reached out to Dekker to do some work to understand more about their culture. And as a result of that, they introduced restorative justice, and they were probably one of the first trusts in the UK to do that. In 2019, our trust narrowly avoided being rated as inadequate. Our leadership was called into question, our safety and effectiveness also severely called into question. So there were a lot of changes taking place within South Tees at that point. A new chief executive was appointed, a new approach to education and leadership development was adopted. And the following year, we began to introduce civility and human factors into our thinking. That was quite fortuitous because, as we learnt along the way, those are great foundations for introducing restorative justice. And Merseycare themselves say they would advise any trust wanting to adopt restorative justice to start with civility and human factors. So, but that was just by chance. And then a couple of years later, we sent over 50 of our staff to attend some training that was jointly delivered by Merseycare and Northumbria University. So a big commitment on the behalf, on the part of our trust to wanting to embrace restorative justice as a way of responding to incidents here in South Tees. So we were really starting to build momentum at that point, which is when nothing happened. So we finished all of this training, and I'm sitting at my desk waiting for the call to arms to say, right, this is the approach we're going to take in South Tees. And days went by and my inbox remained empty. So rather cheekily, I raised my head above the parapet to say, mustn't have been paying attention during the training when we agreed who was going to lead on this, but I'm quite willing to support whoever's going to do so. And I didn't get told who was going to lead on it, but what I got was a response from around the trust of other people saying, I want to help as well. And so this is where I draw upon the second thread of being in a no blame culture. Me being a little bit cheeky was something that I could get away with in our trust. And so off we went to a final session with the University and Merseycare, where they asked everybody what actions we'd put in place so far. And there was a deafening silence around the screen at the time. And I remember the woman from the university looked at all of the faces on screen and said, well, nobody seems to be answering my question, but I can see Paul Williams is laughing. Paul, what's so funny? And I said, well, your response, or the response you're getting, is very similar to what I got when I asked who was leading on this. And it would be wrong of me to speculate on why our exec weren't ready to move with it at the time. But as a result of my sticking my neck out, the next thing I knew was I was asked to co-chair our implementation committee. So be careful. So that's where we got to. And as a result of that, we created 4 work streams who reported into me and one of my colleagues in HR, looking at what this might mean in terms of our patient experience, what it would need in terms of a communication strategy, where we would need to update or amend some of our HR policies, and finally, what sort of training would we need to deliver across the trust to enable this change to take place. So very much from the bottom up, it was all designed by involving volunteers across the trust and then just reporting into our HR director, really for her to rubber stamp it as we went. So I'll hand over to Heidi to tell you a bit more about what it is.
Thank you. So talking a little bit about what does restorative mean and why does it matter? So traditionally our culture and our approach tended towards more of a retributive lens when investigating those adverse events and incidents. Clinical leads, managers involved, often asking which rule had been broken, who broke it, and to what extent. And there'd be a real focus on what were going to be the possible consequences of this breaking of the rule, and who might be involved, who was going to get to make those decisions. So historically, often in response to these events, we would put in additional rules, policies, guidelines, more and more layers of bureaucracy and red tape, with the feeling that that was going to make the situation better. But as we can recognise in complex systems, staff can't possibly comply with even a fraction of the guidelines and procedures that they have to contend with. So putting in these additional layers was highly unlikely to really make a difference. We needed to do something else. So this takes us to more towards a move towards this restorative approach, where we seek to support those who are harmed in adverse instances, rather than deciding who's broken the rules. So in the clinical situation, it's often easy to recognise when a harm has been sustained by a patient. But it's not just patients that are affected in these incidents. We need to look much wider. So those staff that have been directly involved, we recognise will often suffer feelings of guilt anxiety and loss of confidence, and depression as a direct result of being involved in that event. And we often see staff needing to go off on the sick, often for prolonged periods of time. In addition to this, though, the harm can be felt much wider. Family, carers, the wider team, and also the organisation, that the issue around reputational damage and the effects on the wider community, for those communities that may lose faith in the healthcare provider that's local to them. So as restorative practices, we need to recognise that many people have different needs after an event, and the restorative approach is where we look to engage them in conversation, to understand the extent of their hurt, what they need, and reintegrate them back into teams as quickly as possible.
So, how do we go about implementing change like this? Well, from my perspective, it was about this. Being cheeky, being potentially annoying, but being persistent. So I've been talking to anybody who will listen about restorative justice ever since we completed that training in 2022. For those of you who are familiar with the Japanese term nemawashi, which is a gardening term about preparing the roots to some extent, it's just about getting people interested by starting the conversation so that as we have something ready to share, everyone's ready to jump and act upon it. So it's making it part and parcel of everyday conversation. You need to gather some allies. And what I have found is whenever I talk about this, our nursing staff are the first to respond to it. And actually, there's a very senior nurse in this trust shared a personal story of how she'd been on the receiving end of some retributive just culture early in her career and very, very nearly left the health service. And I look at her now and I think what a loss it would be if she had left at that early age. So yeah, find some allies, people who are willing to help. There's a lot to do to implement this, but if you spread the load, it's never too much for any individual. But one thing we did was we seconded one of our PAs to join us for 12 months. And she made a huge difference in organizing meetings, sharing communications, pulling documentation together, designing some of the materials, etc. And so having Faye, who helped us out for that period, was probably a crucial factor in our success. But yeah, get on with it. So when we started the journey, we didn't really know how it would end or when it would end, but there were enough of us who were really enthused by it that we wanted to get our teeth into it. And of course, as we started down this road, then PSURF appeared on the horizon, and the two seemed to fit very, very nicely together. So that gave us some timelines to work to. So 18 months after we started, despite the fact that we're also in the process of setting up a new group structure with a neighbouring trust, we have produced our document, The South Tees Way.
You're back to me now. So at South Tees, as Paul said, we've developed a pathway and a document to support this restorative approach. And this really provides an alternative to that formal process that might have been traditionally the way that we went. And it really gives all people, all parties, an opportunity to secure that outcome that's appropriate. And that's either a patient incident, a code of conduct concern, or a grievance. And it's that open, constructive conversation, really as early as possible, that's pivotal to the success of this resolution pathway. And it's really very much embedded in the way we approach everything, really. It becomes that real, true South Tees way. With that in mind, we wanted to make sure that the local managers were empowered to be able to have the majority of these early conversations in that attempt really to resolve that as quickly and constructively as possible. And occasionally no further actions would be required if there was a successful resolution just through those early conversations. And then on occasion, we might need that third party facilitator to be included. So on that first page, as we can see here, that's where we capture just some high-level details of the event. The idea is to put in minimal detail. We don't want a lot of duplication here. So if a datex has been completed, then we would just embed the link into there. But this is just the beginning of the conversation. And really the second page focuses on understanding what happened and what support might be needed. We record our outcomes, decide what to do, and then this is all part of the next bit of the pathway, a flow chart and recording of outcomes. If I just take you on to what is actually at the heart of our approach. Here, we really are focusing on understanding what happened during this event and having that open and honest conversation where we're taking that lens of blame away and allows people to really open up and be honest. What's important for us to understand is, has the staff member had appropriate training and supervision? Were their actions different to those of peers at that time? Or, as often is the case, they just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and this could have happened to anybody? And is there any evidence that there was an intention to cause harm, which would be in the absolutely tiny cases available? So what we really wanted to understand, that if we were answering no to all of these questions, we can be really confident that this is not a formal investigation, and being able to reassure staff at this early stage that yes, we were going to support them and there were going to be some actions from here, but this was not going to be a formal investigation. By letting staff know at this early stage massively reduces the stresses associated with it. And then lastly, this is our resolution action flow chart, which has the 4 separate arms. So there is absolutely a place for accountability here, and we can see that through all the different strands. So we do still have that formal resolution pathway that sits on the right-hand side there in the dark blue. But actually, what's more importantly in the majority of cases is actually what we're probably looking at here is some need for team or organisational learning. There may be some individual support, so some training that needs to be put in place, potentially some health and wellbeing conversations or interventions. And as occasionally, there may be no actions actually required. So we use this flow chart, and managers have had some great feedback, have found this really useful to help guide them what are the next steps in supporting staff in these adverse events.
So why have we made all of these changes? I'm going to share with you a graph that I stole from the training that we did with Merseycare, which explains partially why it appears a little bit out of date. And I'm sharing this because it's early days for us. I haven't got the data to show how it's impacting on people at South Tees. But that's got to be worth pursuing, that people feel more secure raising concerns about unsafe clinical practice. We started this by calling our session "Blame is the Enemy of Safety." And where people don't feel they can speak up, then obviously we don't have the opportunity to learn and remedy potential areas that put us at risk. Suspensions and formal investigations have also dropped significantly at Merseycare, which, you know, obviously appeals to our staff. They all say, well, that makes perfect sense. Somebody else might say, well, is that a good thing that formal investigations have dropped significantly? The biggest cause of sickness absence is stress and anxiety, and anybody who's ever been involved in a formal investigation can attest to just how stressful an experience it is. So by bringing in autonomy for our line managers to make decisions quickly and be able to say to people, this isn't going to become a formal process, then we're able to reintegrate people and restore their confidence far more quickly. And so every manager who has attended our training to date, and I say that without exception, I keep looking at the stats every day in case it changes, but currently we are on 100% from our staff that they would recommend it to their colleagues. And I mentioned the fact that we are forging closer ties with North Tees. We're not merging with them, but they will be starting on this journey soon. So in the same way as we began by doing some training with Merseycare and Northumbria, going to be sending some of our colleagues from across the river into the early stages of the same process, because it's being recognised by our chief nurse. This is something that we want to embrace across the wider group. So, has anyone any questions? Let's have a look.
Thank you so much, Paul and Heidi. That was really good. And just, you know, for me, I just straight away think of, you know, the importance of psychological safety, and this process obviously really helps to build that and ensure, you know, we're enabling that learning and improvement approach to everything that we do. I know, Paul, you said it was a bit too early to kind of know the impact. What's your sense of it, I suppose, for yourselves at South Tees? Is there anything you've kind of picked up so far?
Yeah, so verbal feedback from people who've attended the training is very often, oh, I wished I'd known about this before.
Okay.
And then you bump into people in corridors who say, oh, I've just done a restorative thing and wasn't it great? And so I wouldn't say it's without exception that you know, people are behind this. There will be people, and I had somebody sort of question me the other day to say, well, is this not just putting people before doing a proper investigation? And I always respond to say, this isn't about avoiding a proper investigation, but actually, if we're wanting to learn from something, we will learn more if our people can speak to us openly and honestly without that fear of retribution.
Of course.
And so it actually improves our ability to investigate in the aftermath of an event. And they went on to say to me, but you're only talking about situations where people are harmed. What about the near misses? You know, we want to learn from those as well. And my personal feeling is, if I'd been involved in a near miss, I've still got that little sense of guilt that, oh my goodness, I was very lucky to get away with that. So there's still a degree of harm there that we can talk about with people. So there's a degree of semantics there, but I see this as something that very much runs alongside everything that we do around patient safety here at South Tees.
And I think it's not limited just to our maybe nursing and medical colleagues, but actually also across our AHP faculty. I did a session with our foundation doctors yesterday, just an awareness session, and really well received. It was feeling like this is what we've needed for so long. And the sense in the room of this kind of feeling of this can only be a good thing, and this is going to really help us to move forward. And not feel afraid, because a lot of people do feel very afraid day to day in their work. Am I going to be in trouble because of this? And that's just not what we want for our staff. We want them to feel empowered, and then we're going to get better care from them. Yeah,
definitely.
Got a hand up?
Yeah, Karen.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
we can.
Oh, great. So thanks very much. This is a real passion of mine, because my sideline is as a mediator, so conflict resolution and everything that goes with it is I love all that stuff, bizarrely enough. And I've just been in, because I work for the ICB, in our system context, like a system workforce group where there are health and care partners, and we were talking. So first of all, I'm wondering, have we shared it out to the system? You know, we're sharing it out via this, but obviously I can connect it to that workforce group, which will be great. But a lot, as you would imagine, of what we were talking about today was obviously the recent riots and the restorative work for our workforce around riots, and the fact that you know, there are staff saying, you know, I'm scared to come to work. I don't want to get on a bus. I'm not coming to work at all. I want to go back to my home country. You know, some quite extreme stuff. So I was wondering if you've, because I did miss some of this session, but could you use this approach, or how can you use this approach, or are you using this approach to address that with your staff?
So, there's a couple of things that came to mind here, and firstly is to acknowledge that our process was initially very much lifted, drag and drop from Merseycare, and we tweaked it here and there. But where we went a stage further was we involved an organisation called Restorative Now in coming to train. Currently we have 70 restorative facilitators in the trust, who are people who are able to sit down with individuals and hear their story and using their experience, understand where there are opportunities to bring people together, where sharing the impact, the questions, the statements that they want to share will be mutually beneficial to both. It's not something that will always happen. There will always be people who will not voluntarily take part in something, but it gives us an option. And what we often find is actually just having those initial conversations with people where we do all of the listening is so cathartic that even if we're unable to bring two parties together, there are benefits that can be achieved along the way.
Fab. Well, I'll be in touch. We'll share this further. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Karen. We've got probably time for one more quick question. Dawn's posted it in the chat. She said, it's really encouraging to hear how approaches are changing. Have you faced much resistance?
I wouldn't say there's been a lot. No.
I think people are a little wary of it to begin with. Is this just another thing? Is this another layer of, is it a fad? Is it a phase? But I think because of the way in which we've embedded it and really brought it together with our core values and our mission statement, it feels like it's weaved into everything. And so we try and bring it up into things that we're planning. We make links with the psychological safety training that we do, the civility matters. So it feels like it's another part of the puzzle. It's not an extra, it's not an added, it's an integral part of everything that we do. So I think once people understand where it fits, I think they think it's a no-brainer, because actually what would you take umbrage against? And particularly because there is still that feeling that there is accountability here. This is not about saying to people, nothing's going to happen. It may be, though, that it's actually, let's get some extra training in for you. Let's get some mediation in there. So providing we've got the support structure around to be able to address the needs, then I think there's no real risk there. And I think people can see that. It's about education, really. And that's one of the things probably that's the greatest challenge for us, is getting the word out there, and at every level. But we've got the buy-in from the senior part of the organisation, and I think that's what's so important here, is to be able to move forward.
Both our Chief Medical Officer and our Chief Nurse have worked in restorative cultures in the past, so they're very much behind us.
Fantastic, brilliant, amazing. Well, thank you so much to both of you for coming along and sharing this fabulous work that you're doing. Thank you everybody for attending. We have just posted a link to be able to give feedback in the chat. We have a number of Lunch and Learn sessions coming up. So our next Lunch and Learn session is on the 18th of September at 1 p.m. and we're going to be joined by Elaine Bidmead from NIHR Applied Research Collaboration, who is a senior research fellow, and she's going to be talking to us about poverty-proofing healthcare. So we hope to see you there. Once again, thank you so much, Paul and Heidi, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.